Several weeks ago, Breuers Together posted a video of historical import. It's time to take a closer look at the men of the choir in 1956. Who they were, what were their lives like, what mattered to them, and where are they or their families today? Many viewers noted the austere faces of a generation past. These were not the children of survivors, but the survivors themselves, in their very youth. Well, they had been here close to 20 years by this time, but the scars were likely still present. Of the 16 members in this performance, several were childless. The rest typically had only one child. The baby boom of the 1950s did not reach them in the way it did the returning soldiers. They, perhaps, were still in survival mode. The choir leader, the Reverend Walter Hess, was the head of the Hebrew school in the congregation, as well as the cantor and the choir leader. He was also the administrator of the shul for many years. Reverend Hess attended the Würzburg Seminary for teacher training and was one of the oldest surviving alumni of that institution when he died over the age of 100 just 2 years ago.
A teacher of the Hebrew language, Hebrew culture, and history. He comes to us with a 17-voice choir, and he simply calls it the synagogue choir. The director is Mr. Walter Hess.
Here is what his son David remembers of that television performance in 1956.
We did not have a television at the time, so my mother, my brother, and myself went to a neighbor who had a TV. And my mother kept saying during the performance, "What are they doing? What are they doing?" Apparently, the transmission of the audio and the video via the television was completely distorted. And my mother always believed that it was deliberately sabotaged, but that is the enduring memory I have of that night. When my father came home that night, he came home very proud. He thought the choir performed very, very well. As far as the members of the choir are concerned, I remember them very well as I see 60 years later this video. It's just an incredible experience, and
the only known surviving member of the choir, Mr. Siggy Holzer, was a shop teacher with the New York Board of Ed for many years. At the time of the television appearance, he was yet unmarried. We met up with Siggy in the shul that he helped restore and save from a quick demise, Beth Medrash Hagadol of 175th Street, the only active shul north of Harlem and below the bridge.
Well, what happened is we were informed that we would be getting a spot in the Tednack Amateur Hour. When we got down there, they had never told us beforehand that they were going to limit us in the number of minutes that we were going to sing. So they kept cutting back on the song that we were going to sing. I came into this neighborhood after I had been discharged from the Army, which was about 1951. My family was living where I still live, at 630 West 173rd Street.
In the same apartment, or you moved into the building?
I moved into the building, and my daughter took over the apartment of my parents later on.
Mr. Joseph Waller was a diamond merchant and one of the first members of Sharei Hatikva to move all the way north on Fort Washington Avenue to the area next to the park. His grandchildren, David and Gary Hess of Suffern, New York, and the Carolinas, respectively, remember him warmly.
Their religious man loved the choir. He couldn't get enough of that choir. If you sat down and started talking about the choir, you better have an hour or so. So my grandfather was born in 1903. He was um, he was put into concentration camps 3 times. Not big ones, not well-known ones, but just local concentration camps. And twice he escaped. And the third time, his brother, my uncle Max, went and got papers for him to get out. And the Niyama, the boat, and sailed and went to America. Now, from what I know from that ship, the ship was supposed to hold 100 people. It had 3,000 Jews on it. A lot of them died from sickness. They had 7 cows that were very ill. And when they killed them, of course, they weren't kosher. So my grandfather and family didn't eat it. But a lot of people who ate it, children and elderly, died. He could, but he cut diamonds. Then he was going to teach diamond cutting in Tallahassee. But my grandmother didn't like Tallahassee, so they came back to New York. And he was a diamond merchant.
Deborah Nussbaum Cohen writes for Haaretz and the Jewish Telegraphic Agency. When she saw the video, she was overcome with emotion. It's the first time she had seen her grandfather, who died shortly after this performance was taped and before she was born. Other than a small photo and his Nazi-era passport, there is very little to remember the man Sali Nussbaum, who led the immigrant struggle with his wife Bertel to raise their only son, Deborah's father, Jerry.
My opa and his brother-in-law, my uncle Ludwig, my oma's sister's husband, and my oma's father were arrested on Kristallnacht and taken to Buchenwald, and their father-in-law died there, presumably of a heart attack. But after a few months, 3 or 4 months, my opa Sali was released, very sick, very thin, very religious people, and my opa went to his rabbi and said, what should he do? And the rabbi said, you go. And they got on the train on a Friday night, and their passports are amazing documents. They're stamps from all around the world in every language imaginable: Polish, Russian, Korean, Japanese. They just went train by train by train, eventually by ship. My father was an only child, and when I asked my Oma why, she said Hitler stole my other children.
They weren't killed. It was just
They just meant
anymore.
and they just didn't have the wherewithal.
Right.
That's what she meant.
Right. So there's
My father's cousin Helen, who told me that Opa was a man of very few words. It seems like he was pretty taciturn, and he was a smoker. Anyway, he wasn't much of a talker, but he would sing. He really loved to sing in this choir that you have this amazing video of.
Theodore Apt. He was a member of Sharei Hatikva, and he loved being in the choir. I think he loved living in New York. He worked on a shipping dock. He was a shipping clerk. And my mother was one of the original latchkey kids, as she used to tell me. My opa taught handicapped Jewish children in a school in Germany. And he came back after a long weekend and found nobody in the school. A very sad testament, and we understand that all the children were probably gassed. Living through something like that is so hard to imagine. He lived under Nazi occupation for quite a while, right under their noses. He and my grandmother and my mother, who was a little girl at the time, they lived in Berlin, but he was born in Niederaula, Germany. And till the day he died, he always had a fear of government. because living under Nazi occupation did that to him.
These are some of the stories behind the faces of the 16 men and their choir leader, who took the stage one night in September of 1956 to create a snapshot in history and record a legacy for us to cherish.